The Jesus Trilogy, Book 1, Four Messiahs, Chapter 60. You could cut the air with a knife. There was very little talk, in fact, very little noise. The trip had been tiring, but even so, the boys were not tired. This was the game of the decade. One would expect that the game of the decade would take place in the pro ranks or even in college. But everyone knew the pro league was corrupt. Fixes were common, and there had been no big college game for a while. UD, University of Damascus, had dominated college ball for 4 years. They seemed to get all the top players. No one had beaten them for years. It was rumored that Ching Lin was behind the ability of the universe to build such an amazing talent pool. But the real story was that the pros raided the high schools now, especially those in Judea. And so it went. The rich got richer and the poor got poorer. The Four Horsemen had come a long way from that amazing sixth grade team all the way through high school. 7 years and 76 straight games without a loss. Not even a tie could blemish their record. There were a couple of one-point wins and even one overtime victory. 2 years ago, an upstart Jericho team took them into overtime, but the Horsemen prevailed. Now the pressure was mounting to an unbelievable level, more than a high school senior could be expected to bear. But the Four Horsemen had been through a lot, not only in football, but in life, and none was about to be intimidated by a little game of football. Johnny still didn't think he should be here. His emotions simmered to a boil. He was sitting on a bench in front of his locker, slowly and methodically taping his knees. The locker room was beautiful, a far cry from the one in Little Nazareth. It even had a warm pool. Servants brought in hot water every so often to keep the water temperature up. Johnny looked up to see Judas' head barely above water, soaking his ankles. Johnny could not get his comatose father out of his mind, the man he loved, squeezing his hand. Tears kept welling in his eyes. He, Johnny, who never, ever cried. Memories came easy. The first time his dad told him he thought he might be the Messiah. The long talks they had. Then the realization by his father that he, Johnny, was not the promised Messiah, but was instead the messenger. He was to be the herald, the voice, crying in the wilderness. Johnny remained disbelieving. He was a football player, that's all he ever wanted to be. He wasn't going to go out and preach in any wilderness. He was going to go out and star in 100-yard grass fields all across Judea, Egypt, Samaria, Syria, maybe even as far away as Athens and Rome. To play in Rome would be the ultimate thrill. But he had a game to win tomorrow. He knew football was a team game more so than any other sport. It took all 22 players to work like a machine, but he was also very proud of his ability to take over a game all by himself. Power football. That was Johnny's game. When he was on, no one could stop him. He loved that feeling of elation. It gave him a high like no other experience. Being the zone, they called it. More than beer, more than local weed, more than a good steak, more than acing a test, even more than sex. Now that was saying something. He had not been in love yet, as his cousin Jesus was. Jesus had said that being in love was even better than being in the zone. That someday Johnny would find out for himself. Johnny had a lot of good times, but none compared to being in the zone. He had prayed that he would be in that elusive zone in today's game. However, he knew it was impossible to predict when it would happen. But what he wanted it today. His thoughts shifted back to his father lying in a coma. How he loved his old man. He hadn't realized it all along. But last night, rather early this morning, it became crystal clear. He loved football, but he loved his father more. On the ride down to Jerusalem, Johnny did a lot of thinking. And as he rode over the last hill and set his eyes on the grand city of Jerusalem, he vowed that though he might continue to play football, he would also become that messenger. He had no idea what the job entailed. He would just have to trust in his father and God, and most of all in himself. He had many talents and was extremely popular. He was class president. He had a good speaking voice, and he could have any girl he wanted. He didn't know what the future held, but he vowed it would be fun. Johnny's mini elation was short-lived as his father's face again flashed across his brain. He had the sinking feeling all morning that his dad would die soon. He feared it would be today. He also thought that if it happened, he would sense it immediately. He prayed it would not be today, but he had little faith that his dad would last this day, or even until the morning. Johnny just knew he would never see him alive again. Zach had always told him that they would be reunited in the court of heaven, and that the football fields were there would be made of gold with diamond yard markers and goalposts of silver. Despite his dad's elaborate yet partially scroll-based vision, Johnny was skeptical that there was such a place called heaven. Life on earth was good, and when he was in the zone, well, what could be better than that? He had discussed that very subject with his father a year or so ago. Zach had said that sex was the closest to heaven that he had ever gotten, especially since there had been so much love between him and Elizabeth. Johnny chose not to admit that he was sexually active, though he was aware that Zach knew he was. Johnny had said that being in the zone was the best, and he proceeded to describe it to his father. Zach had then declared that the pleasures of heaven would far outstrip any that humanity could save on earth. A friendly argument ensued, but nothing was settled. They never talked about it again. Johnny felt a hand on his shoulder. He jumped and then looked up to see Coach Vincenti. "How's the knee, Johnny?" the coach asked. "Feels great, Coach." Johnny lied. "And how's your pop?" "Not too good, Coach." "Well, I pray he'll get better soon." "I don't know, Coach. This may be the end for him," Johnny said. "Well, it's in God's hands. Anyway, you go out today and win this game for your dad." "I intend to, sir," Johnny said. He still didn't know why anyone had to die. If God was a God of love, why would he allow anyone to die? Johnny had vowed to learn the answer to that question if it killed him. Little did he know that it would. Judas was in a state of euphoria and total relaxation. He loved the bubbles created in the hot water when he would move around. Gentile had a hot pool in her Jerusalem home. They had spent an hour in there one day, just the two of them. They had even left their suits on. His love was total. Gentile was unlike any other girl he had ever met. He looked down at his swollen ankles. The water felt so good, his body ached almost all the time, but he had to get through this game. Then he would be able to quit football. He loved the game, but he hated the pain it had caused him. Now he just wanted to marry Gentile and live the good life. Judas already had plenty of money, and he was going to parlay the nest egg that he had to get him into banking. Money was first on his list, but recently Gentile's appeal had surpassed that of the shekel. She was now number one. Even he wouldn't have thought it could happen, but he had never been happier. He knew he would need significant money to take care of his bride-to-be. He'd proposed to her in his mind 1,000 times, and now he had come up with the perfect plan. He would see her briefly as the team went out on the field. Then at halftime, when his team would no doubt be ahead by 2 or 3 touchdowns, he would run up into the stands, kneel before her, and propose. It would be the perfect publicity stunt, and everyone would see him do it. He loved money. He loved Gentile, but he also loved the spotlight. Gentile would have to say yes, then in the second half they would pound Jerusalem East into the ground. He would get the game ball and the woman he loved, the perfect ending to a perfect day. But as with all perfect days, there were a few glitches to be overcome. Judas was wise beyond his 18 years, and he knew this all too well. His 2 bad ankles somehow had to hold up. But an even more pressing problem was Ching Lin's threat hanging over his head. He still could not believe the most powerful mob boss in the world had personally come to see him, little old Judas. It had given him a feeling of importance beyond any he had ever had before. He had dreams of someday being in Ching's position. What power, what money, what, he was about to say women. But he caught himself. He knew he loved Gentile with every cell of his body. But could he be satisfied with just her? Wasn't entirely sure, but the image of her face in his mind made him smile. He was in love, so the rest would take care of itself. More urgent was the threat of Ching Lin's offer that could not be refused. Judas had watched the betting line all week. It had started at 7 on Monday, then went up to 7 1/2, and then up to 8. But a featured article about Johnny and his gimpy knee in the Jerusalem Times took the line back down to 7 1/2, then 7, then 6 1/2. Judas had hoped against hope that it would drop to 6. That would solve all his problems. But he knew it was too good to be true. Ching Lin had too much power. He would keep it there. If it had gotten down to 6, Judas would not have to try for 2 and make it. The game should be decided by a touchdown. He had run through the scenario over and over and had finally come up with a solution. The spread finally settled at 7 1/2. If indeed the Nazareth team was ahead by 6, he would just take over for the regular holder and fumble the snap. Or if that was too obvious, he would whisk the ball up in his arms after the snap, and he would just be swarmed under by the onrushing tacklers. Then Jerusalem would lose, but Nazareth would not beat the spread. The team would be happy, and Ching Lin would be happy. Also, $10 million richer. Judas turned to see that the hand on his shoulder was that of the coach. "How's the ankle, Judas?" "They feel great, Coach. They can't wait to get out and dazzle those East boys." "And that they shall." Judas nodded agreement, a big grin coming to his face. "Coach, you're the greatest." "Thanks, son, but you 4 have made me the best." "Been our pleasure, sir." Judas stood and hugged Vincenti, getting him wet in the process. "Well, smoke 'em today, sir." As he said this, his left foot slipped from under him and splashed down in the water. Seeing what had happened, the other 3 horsemen and Coach Vincenti roared with laughter. Judas came up out of the water and yelled at the top of his lungs, "Victory is ours!" As Barabbas sat at his locker, he began to get real nervous. The pressure on him was twofold. The game, the biggest of his life, was plenty for any high school senior. Scouts had been at his door for weeks, but his father kept sending them away. The little plan must go on without a hitch, and Abel didn't want any attention coming his way with the game and the heist so near. Abel had said he wanted Barabbas to win, but had placed a lot more importance on the throw after the game. Barabbas, though confident of his strong arm, wasn't entirely sure he could get the ball out of the stadium and over the 100-foot wall. Throwing it on that high of an arc to clear the wall was one thing, but the wall was probably 30 feet wide and the arc would have to be even higher. He was nervous about the game, but even more nervous about that throw. What was in that football anyway? If his throw didn't make it over the wall, would he then take all the blame? Would they toss him in jail or maybe just kill him? No more football, no more women, no more rock band, no more nothing. If the Romans didn't do anything to him, the 6 Points group might come after him. He had witnessed killings by the 6 Point outfit. He had seen his father run through 2 men with his sword for committing a treasonous act against 6 Points in the Hebrew movement. It had turned his stomach and had bothered him for days. Surely his father wouldn't allow them to kill him. If the throw wasn't perfect as it had to be to clear that wall. After all, those men were asking the impossible. He never guaranteed them that he could get the ball over the wall, but that didn't matter to 6 Points or to his father. He had to do this. It was an order. He must comply. He must get it done. One more thing worried him. This ball had taken on some added weight. Could he make it spiral? Could he even throw it, or would it just flutter? Barabbas needed answers, but there were none to be had. His greatest anger was having to worry more about the throw than about the game. Even if they won, and he was confident they would, his enjoyment would be tempered by the aftermath. He just hated to do it, but his hands were tied. He still vowed he would have fun this day. Judas' slip in the tub brought him back to reality. He laughed hard and long over his halfback's guffaw. Jesus had been the only one of the 4 who would be really elated going into this game. He had just gotten engaged the night before, and he was on cloud 9. As he sat in the dressing room, his mood cooled. He began thinking about his father. Why did people have to die? Why was there illness? He, the promised Messiah, was supposed to stop all this killing, all this suffering, all this death. But how? How could he, a lowly carpenter's son, make any impact on such a great big world? Jesus had asked his heavenly Father as well as his earthly parents about it. Joseph and Mary told him that God would let him know, but he hadn't heard from God either. He was heading into the biggest football game of his life, and he had just gotten engaged to the love of his life. Wouldn't all that get in the way? There were no answers. He wouldn't have money for college, obviously, and the glamour guys got all the acclaim. Of the four horsemen, it looked like he would be the only one not to get a scholarship. Johnny and Judas were great runners, and Barabbas could throw the ball a mile. Jesus was extremely talented, but he was just the lonesome end. He was sneaky, fast, agile, and could turn on a dime. He ran pure, disciplined routes, and he had the best hands in football. Just ask Mary, his new fiancée. She knew. But all the above was not going to translate into money. Besides, with his father so ill, he would be needed in the carpentry shop. All his brothers and sisters were gone. Jed was off in school in Jerusalem. Josh was working for his dad's competitor, Hazen. Rachel was going to be married in June. She was already pregnant. Jennifer was at a boarding school in Samaria. So it would be up to Jesus to take over the family business. He still remained in the dark. How could a Hebrew carpenter have any impact on the changing world? He had spent hours thinking about this, but had come up with no good answer. The prophet Isaiah had intimated that the Messiah would die. Jesus wondered when that would be. How could this impending death possibly help anything? He wasn't making any impact now. What could he possibly accomplish if he were dead? Jesus didn't have any particular fear of death, but he did want to marry Mary, and he wanted to have some life and to have some children. Just thinking about all of this made him very frustrated, but what could he do? He would just have to keep marching ahead and try to trust in God, but it was hard, very hard. Just then the image of Mary flashed across the sky of his mind. A smile began to creep onto his face as if the sun was rising. And in fact, the sun was glaring on him. He jumped about a foot in the air when he heard Judas' big splash. He feared Judas might be hurt, but he began to smile even bigger when Judas came up out of the water, the V sign held high. Jesus believed it a good sign. He believed victory would be theirs this day.